Good morning. My name is Robert Schmid, also known as Mr. IoT. I'm the Chief IoT Technologist for Deloitte with a deep passion for all things digital. This week on Coffee with Mr. IoT, I'm talking with Rick Burke, one of Deloitte's specialist leaders, and actually my colleague. We worked together on one of our projects for Smart Factory. Good morning, Rick. Thank you for joining. It's great to have you.
Yeah, Robert, thank you for the invite. Glad to be here.
Rick, we work on Smart Factory together. What's Smart Factory? It sounds it's a short thing. What does that mean for people?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nebulous thoughts around what is Smart Factory, but really what Smart Factory is really taking data off of your current production assets or perhaps the environment and driving business improvement through those technologies and changes in processes and people, quite frankly, and how they do work within a plant. So a lot of people think Smart Factory is a lights out factory with robots running everywhere, but in reality there's many different permutations of Smart Factory depending on where the business value is in terms of deploying these investments within the four walls of a factory.
So before we go into the example we both work at, what's been the most surprising Smart Factory aspect for you? We spend a lot of time putting sensors on things, but you said there's many aspects. What's the one that is most surprising to you, and what's the one you like the best? Sort of like, what do you find the most fascinating?
So to me, sort of the most interesting thing is just the plethora of old machinery out in the manufacturing plants, certainly in the US, that may not be easy to connect to. But what we see is with the advances in technology, IoT technologies and sensors, that barrier is being broken down. It's actually a lot of times a better opportunity to go into those plants than it is to, say, a modern plant where they already have access to data, say in SCADA systems or historians that they can start building advanced analytics upon. It's really, I find, more interesting going into the older plants and bringing customers along the journey from where they think they're kind of stuck to where we can generate tremendous business value for them. What gets me really excited is, for me personally, I get to combine my background starting over 20-something years ago as an automation engineer doing PLC programming, man-machine interface, to now actually bringing the IT/OT convergence together. Because when we first tried to do this back in the mid-90s, plant IT and corporate IT simply didn't even talk together. Networks didn't even connect together. There was really no concept of a chief information officer or a chief supply chain officer, and largely plants were fiefdoms. And so whatever happened within the plant was really under the jurisdiction of the plant manager. So fast forward 20 years now, and we're seeing all these silos breaking down, largely because of technology that now allow us to integrate from the shop floor to the top floor more than we ever could before. And that, to me, is really what's exciting.
So it's funny you talk about how, as we call OT and IT meet, right? Operational technologies and information technologies are becoming together. Don't you find it's still, yes, they talk to each other now, but it's still slightly two different worlds? What do you see in those two worlds that starting to shake up? And explain a little bit to people what's so different about the two worlds.
Yeah, so for me, IT has always been considered sort of the back office corporate function. A lot of times it was more around business systems enablement, so your ERPs or your PLM type systems, even basic networking and telecom. But with advances in IoT and the internet in general, now we can connect up assets from a plant and roll them up onto the corporate enterprise level and even beyond into the cloud. And the only way you're going to make that all happen is to orchestrate across both your operational technology teams that largely sit in your plants, and then integrate that with perhaps your corporate IT or even shared service function, and then ultimately decide whether to move that beyond into, say, a cloud environment.
So you said in your early days you programmed PLCs. Tell us a little bit of what I love always hearing how people get to where they are today. So I don't know, tell us a little bit about that, and then about your path to where you are today. I think you joined us a couple of years ago. And
That's right. Yeah, so I started as an electrical engineer with a minor in computer science, and I really was fascinated by seeing machinery operate and be able to write software to make things happen in a physical environment. And so PLC programming was really the first foray into that. And that's writing, it's not even code that anyone would on this call probably would recognize. It's relay ladder logic. And it was truly sort of a digital twin model of the way that an electrical schematic would flow. And so it was very unique, but very interesting, real-time hardened infrastructure. And the other part, which I kind of laugh at today, is did human machine interface design. So how could operators start moving from even like paper tape or SPC charts to a computer monitor, and thinking now about how we talk about personas and human-centered design, and how do we really tailor the user experience to drive the maximum outcome for the role or the persona in the plant. Again, a lot of what we're doing now in the quote unquote IoT world, the concepts have been around for a very long time. I think we're finally at a point now where there's enough maturation where people understand the value of these types of investments, whether it's around the human-centered design element or it's around sensorization of assets. And that, to me, is where Deloitte Smart Factory bring it all together.
PLCs. Tell people what PLCs are. I mean, it's sort of and what did they what do they look like? What was it you wrote? Like, how does this work? How did that work?
Yeah, so programmable logic controller. These things used to be almost as big as cars, and much like all the other technology now, have shrunk down to a micro device. We deploy them on the edge to do a lot of high frequency data processing. But programming is, I call it programming. It was almost a bit more of configuration. So a lot of basically what you're modeling is a lot of if then else conditions using a very proprietary software, whether it's Allen Bradley or it's a GE or whatever, or a Siemens controller. They all have their own unique programming platforms. Now, over time, those have evolved, right? That's kind of the legacy world. But now programming those is much like you would see in a lot of other technologies.
So let's fast forward to today. PLCs still exist. PLCs still run the machinery, right? But now we connect to them and we do edge processing. Tell us a little bit about what a smart factory looks like on the floor. How does that work, particularly on an older factory floor? People who are interested in instrumenting some old machinery. How does that work? What do you do? And then how is that sort of different? Often we get asked, can you make us digital, right? That's all like the entrance point before they meet with us. And for many, that means really smart factory. Just to walk us through a factory line that we're working on.
Sure. So what I want to make sure people avoid is the concept of the magic digital pixie dust, right? And I think smart factory is the best way to make real how digital technologies can improve business outcomes. And what we do is we look at the value stream for the customer across their manufacturing process and identify what's destroying value along the production process. Once you understand that, then you can start identifying what information you need from either your assets or your people or even the environment or perhaps the materials that are flowing through your process in order to unlock that value. So once you start identifying that, then you can say, okay, if I have this information, how can I use that to empower my personnel in the plant? Or how can I drive a piece of equipment differently? You also have to say, okay, well, I don't have this data, and how can I get that data? And that's where we look at secondary sensors edge computing devices to be able to capture that additional data set, merge it perhaps with even disparate data sets, and allow us to start driving insights and ultimately things like machine learning to start doing more predictive, whether you're talking about predictive maintenance or simply asset performance. How can we start informing operators on ways that they should be better running the lines? The other thing that we find is through unlocking this data, it's helping to dispel a lot of mythology around how people think production lines run versus the reality of how production lines run, and down to the specific asset on a line, and knowing that it could be many lines in a plant and many plants in the network. IoT and the data can really start dispelling those mythologies, which also unleashes value.
Fascinating. So, by the way, if you're just joining us, I'm Robert Schmid, the Chief IoT Technologist for Deloitte, and you're watching Coffee with Mr.IoT. Today, I'm talking with Rick Burke, and we're talking about smart factories. So, we do all this. What do we get on the other side? What's the benefit? What do we figure out? You and I work together on a particular project, and it's been really fascinating to watch how we generate value. What is the value in particular cases?
Yeah, so the value for a lot of customers right now is how to do more with the assets they currently have. How can they avoid buying a new production line or building a new plant? And the value there is leveraging existing assets, some that might be, dumb as nails, that we can go in and sensorize and collect that data. The value often manifests itself in overall equipment effectiveness improvement, which translates into real value, real hard dollars, unleashing that capacity. Others could be around safety, right? You can use digital technologies in order to drive a safer work environment through geofencing or biometric monitoring of your employees in the plant. So there's many different ways of creating value through smart factory technologies. They just manifest themselves in different ways, and we need to understand what the problem statement is that our customers are trying to address through a smart factory program.
Give us some numbers. What are some typical numbers that we see? I think it's really fascinating when you hear absolute numbers versus sort of like more abstract.
Yeah, so we've seen anything, for a large oil refiner where a movement of 1 or 2% OEE is massive, and that's a huge success. We see other clients that may be on the lower end of their manufacturing capability or maturity, who could get 15 to 20% OEE improvement, right? So it all really depends on industry and volume. Obviously, a refinery pushes through a tremendous amount of volume through their assets versus, say, a smaller, discrete manufacturer that may not have that same level of scale. And also looking at, a lower maturity customer, being able to bring them, really leapfrog them into the future, tends to have, in my opinion, a lot higher payback than a lot of the mature industries. But again, if you can move a mature industry 1 or 2 points of OEE in a high volume environment like a refiner, it's a tremendous amount of value unlocked.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about millions of cost savings or improvements through OEE, operational equipment efficiency, right? That fall out of this per factory line, not just a little bit, so big numbers. And then often what it means is, as you said, leapfrogging, taking old equipment and actually extending its lifespan, right? Because, it still might work just fine, but it's not as smart, and we can smartify it. So it extends the asset's lifespan. And also, if you push more out, you might not have to buy new machinery and install a whole new factory line anyhow. So big CapEx savings there too. So that's been for us.
Yeah, and another point I wanted to make is sometimes you can implement smart factory, but not really see smart factory, if you get what I mean. So we can go in and collect data off of assets. But if you walk the lines, you may not really see, I don't see robots. I don't see, automated guided vehicles, right? That's a different type or different level of smart factory than simply creating value out of data and driving actionable insights to the right people at the right time. So maybe you see people walking around now with tablets, right? And that's really the manifestation of what you see as a smart factory in that type of environment, right? So I think people just conceptually need to be aware of, you can have a very smart factory that still looks very old, right? So
it's a good point.
Yeah, everything's not a clean room, and everything's not a a semiconductor fabrication factory, right? But it can still be quote unquote a smart factory.
So, I got to talk about our rubber duck, the Internet of Rubber Ducks, right? We have the virtual factory by Deloitte mobile app that anybody can download. I'm sure you have it on your phone. Do you carry actually one of the things with you, one of the markers that you print out? Do you have one?
I do. I have that in my work bag with me at all times. You never know when you want to show a rubber duck factory.
It's actually, as much as it's fun, this is pretty close to what we do. I mean, if you think about it, of the use cases, we do many of those, don't we?
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's just one manufacturing archetype that's been visualized through a very fun environment. But reality is there's so many different manufacturing archetypes out there. But at the end of the day, smart factory capabilities, Internet of Things can drive value no matter what manufacturing archetype you're working in.
So you keep talking about sensors and how we put the Internet of Things to work. What are the sensors that people typically put on, and which ones are showing the most value? Because at the end of the day, we've had people on these lines that have been on the lines for 20, 30 years. They know those machines really well. So what's so new about the sensors, and which sensors are we talking?
Right. So there's a couple of things. You just touched on one of them, which is the aging workforce, right? And how much of the way production machinery runs is based on their own human intuition, having done this for years and years and years. Reality is that talent will be leaving the workforce in the very near future. So how do we overcome that? One is through using data to start generating predictive models based on data facts as opposed to human intuition, and start informing, say, the next generation of operators who may not have to be as senior, may not have to be as skilled, on how they should be setting up the lines. Now, the reality is there's also information that isn't stored anywhere, right? So one of the things we have to do as part of one of these programs is identify, again, what is that data that's important? If there's gaps, how can we potentially address that through secondary sensors, whether that be vibration, temperature, amperage on an asset, to looking at level switches on a tank, or pressure differentials across the filter, right? And those are things that an operator today may have zero visibility to. And so by making that data available in either through alarming or through visualizations at a workstation, that to me is how this is different than the way businesses have been operating.
Interesting. I always think of vibration sensors as people just walking around and hearing things. In the end of the day, that's very true, except vibration sensors now give you a hearing above the high frequencies you can't hear, lower frequencies you can't hear. I have to tell you, one of the things that our client together while I was out there that fascinated me is how we sensorized the gearbox. And not just sensorized the gearbox, but one of our colleagues had a paper there from like a scientific paper from over 20 years ago, how we knew actually how these gearboxes worked, but we couldn't quite measure that on an ongoing basis. So measuring stuff real time today is also a big deal, and getting real time insights.
That's right.
So, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, on that gearbox example, I think it's more than just noticing a trend in the vibration. It's now being able to detect, based on the frequency, exactly what the failure mode is. So is it a bearing, or is that the gear teeth, right? So you can start now helping the maintenance personnel know exactly what's going wrong with the machine versus just something is wrong with the machine. And that is absolutely time to value in a manufacturing operation.
But it's almost like you said this before, right? We programmed PLCs before. We had a lot of the technology before, except it wasn't up to what we needed to really do the smart factory as we do it today, with the massive compute power that we have to predict models, with the real-time sensors, with the networks of today. So really, it's sort of like taking old principles and actually making them work with all the tools we have today. So very fascinating. So let's look forward for a second, Rick. I mean, we're coming to the end. This is sort of like my final question for you. We're here today. We get an OE improvements anywhere from a couple percentage points for high volume producers to 15 percentage points to 20 percentage points for discrete manufacturers. We help people with safety. We help people avoid CapEx spend with higher throughput. We reduce scrap. Great. What are we going to do next year and the year after? Where is this going to go? And what do we need to get there? What are the things that you're looking forward to coming our way in the next couple of years?
Yeah, one of the things that we see a lot happening right now as people are working on their FY19 budgets is everyone is putting money in for not only just digital, but also smart factory. And whether that starts as a predictive maintenance type of opportunity, or it's, hey, we want to fundamentally go wide across a production asset or a production line. That's where I see things going. It's not a question of if anymore, it's just a question of when. And then getting the right stakeholders together for smart factory is where we see a lot of activity right now. How do you get your IT functions, your OT functions, your plant operations, your business units, and even your finance communities together to all understand the value and the priorities that should be put on smart factory? You're bringing a lot of organizations together that have been disparate in the past, and you need to bring those together as a community of interest, essentially, in order to drive these programs forward. So we're starting to see some convergence now of these organizations, and it may just be certain individuals coming together across those functions. It may not be a formalized function, but at least it's an informal alignment of these different disparate business units to drive these programs forward.
Gosh, Rick, I was hoping both you and I have glasses. We're going to talk about how we're going to see inside our glasses or the rubber duck factory everywhere we go, but I guess we're not quite there yet. A little too futuristic for both you and I out there. Well, Rick,
it could be a couple of years out there, but right now it's driving value, in my opinion, from data, existing assets, filling the gaps, generating actionable insights, unlocking value. Yes, absolutely see the future for wearables, for augmented reality, virtual reality. Just thinking of some of our customers and where they are in their digital journey, that's probably a year or two out from now.
I don't know if you've seen this. This is sort of like one of my little examples in our day-to-day life. If you take your Google Maps, there is actually an augmented reality version now where it shows you turn by turn, not on a map, but you can have your camera up and it tells you take a right at this street and a left at that street. It's sort of like the user day-to-day use Pokemon Go, but just for regular day-to-day use. So very fascinating to me. So it'll be interesting. Rick, thank you so much for joining.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
It looks like our coffee break is coming to a close. And with that, I just want to say, please join me again next Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, for another Coffee with Mr.IoT. And by the way, if you missed any of today's fascinating conversation about Smart Factory with Rick, check out my YouTube playlist where you can see today's show and any past shows. And with that, happy Friday. Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.